everyone. So yeah, as our dear host just said, I'm here to talk about our current time through a historical perspective. And that can be difficult. We're going to make a few assumptions. Just as we look back on the people of the 20th century, we're going to assume that people 100 years from now are going to look back on us in the same way. And it's a matter of taste and analysis and trend of what will be remembered, but some things stick out a bit more than others, as far as I'm concerned, at least. And this is what I picked up for this presentation. Yes. To start off with, we have the 9/11 attacks on the US in 2001. And that itself is an historical, noteworthy event, since that was the first attack on US soil since Pearl Harbor. So that is something that most likely historians will take note of. But more importantly, this later caused the US to invade both Iraq and Afghanistan, directly or indirectly. That's a matter of political debate. We're not getting into that. But the matter of fact is that 9/11 indirectly caused destabilization of both those countries and the nearby region. In the invasion of Iraq, for example, that later allowed for the rise of the Islamic State and prolonged the Syrian civil war due to the drain of resources. And both Syrian civil war and Afghanistan later led to the migrant crisis in Europe. So what we can say here is that the event that caused it all, that's a matter of historical note, but also the consequences and the consequences of the consequences. So I think historians will take note of this, because it's an anomaly on those first 10 years of the 21st century. So this will probably be written down in history books. And further on, we also have the EU. Now, the European Union, you're probably all familiar with it in one way or another, but it has not always been as it is today. It started as a trade deal with steel and coal communities, and later moved on to agriculture, and evolved into what it is today. It's not going to remain as it is today. It's going to keep on evolving. And Brexit, the UK leaving the EU, that is going to shape a path in the history of the European Union. Now, the EU has kept the peace in Europe and promoted prosperity and economic integration around the continent, and has spread democracy as well. And Brexit is going to determine if the EU is going to be more integrated, it's going to keep on working harder with their member states, or if it's going to dissolve. Depending on how the outcome goes for the United Kingdom, either more member states feel like, yeah, we can leave as well. That's going to dissolve the union, and that's going to reverse progress in economic progress in Europe, at least. Or when the UK leaves, member states feel like, well, we can't leave, look how badly it ended up for them. Now we have to keep our focus, instead of trying to leave, use that focus to change the EU, to shape the EU, and to work with it. So we're going to see, it can go either way, we don't know. That's the matter for the historians to record how it went. But we can say that no matter how it goes, this is going to be important for future, for how our time develops. Furthermore, we also have Russian aggression. Now, most of you probably know that Russia annexed Crimea. That means that they forcefully took over land that belonged to another country. It used to belong to Ukraine. Russia claims it belongs to them. The United Nations says that's an illegal act. So officially, it's still Ukraine. But then that is also of historical note, since annexations doesn't really happen anymore. War to conquer others' land is not something that we see in our time, but it happened here. And people are going to remember that. It's going to be an anomaly sticking out from our timeline. But we can also see that Russia are flexing their military muscles. They're threatening Estonia, Sweden is feeling somewhat threatened as well, and there's a lot of talk about what will they do, what won't they do. Now, it could just keep on being the status quo. Nothing much happens. Not really something that you put down in a history book if all's the same. But it can also be that they start to be more aggressive. and that could lead to escalation, that could lead to conflict. That would be noted down, that will be remembered. It could also lead to a breaking point where Russia has to demilitarize. That is also something that is going to be noteworthy. Again, a forking path, we don't know which way it will go, but most likely this is going to be remembered one way or another. Climate change, that's broad. But the thing is that's going to be remembered is that for the first time in history, climate change actively causes people to move away from where they live. We have climate change refugees. Ecologies change, food supplies change, where water lines go or shorelines go, that's changing. Storms are getting worse. Climate change, for the first time ever, is having physical impact on the planet. Now, that climate change started before, that's something we wrote down in our history books, that we have known this is going to happen. But 100 years from now, they were going to remember that this is the time when we can first see it happening for ourselves. And what we decide to do with that, they are going to remember that 100 years from now, let me say that. Moving on, democracy. Complex topic. We can see that in the last 10 years, we have actually gone down in the number of full democracies, but we have also gone down in the number of authoritarians. So what we can see here is that we're moving more in a democratic direction, but not a perfect democratic system. But we don't know which way the trends will go. But as far as we can see, nations are becoming less authoritarian, they're becoming freer, they're becoming more democratic. Why this is going to be noted down is that theory states that if all nations of the world were democratic, there would be world peace. For the civil populace, there's no point in invading another country. Like your children or yourself are going to be involved at war, you could die, your resources are going to be drained, your government are going to enforce harsher restrictions on the population. So democracies have nothing to gain on declaring war on other democracies. So if all nations are democratic, no war, at least the theory goes. So how this develops is going to be kept an eye on, because this could be the first step in the right direction towards global peace in the form of global democracy. Furthermore, we have internet access, and that sounds like a very millennial thing to talk about. Yes, I know. But in the last 20 years, more or less since the invention of the internet, at least for general population, we have gone from 1% access to 45% access. We can also see that electrical access in the world has increased in the last 16 years, from 78% to 87%, which enables for more internet access further down the line. The reason why we want this to occur is because this allows people to educate themselves. It might not be systematical, it might not be standardized, but they have access to knowledge. This allows women in poorer countries to learn from home, so education is not male-dominated. It allows for a more liberal and freer society, since you can always fact-check what another person says. You don't have to believe the government on every single point, because you can actually go and look up what the opposition says for your own sake, at least in most cases. But yeah, so internet access allows for a freer society where more people have access to more knowledge, and we're all going to gain from that sense. An educated population makes better decisions when it comes to voting, and just economically, nations develop better. So yeah. Literacy rate is somewhere in the same ballpark. We can see that the gap between male and female literacy rate is shrinking, which means that the difference between the amount of men that can't read and the amount of women that can't read is becoming more and more about the same value. And literacy rate overall is shrinking as well. This also means that women can educate themselves in a different manner. They can be breadwinners in their homes, since they don't have to depend on the man for knowledge, where work is, how to work. And this is probably going to lead to a more equal society between the genders. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but it could lead to that. So how this trend goes is something that also would be noted down, since if the illiteracy rate ever becomes 0, well, I think we can all agree that that will be a better world for all of us. Other significant events is gene alteration in mosquito manipulation. The reason that sounds very abstract and scientific, but it's actually a matter of fact that we can now make mosquitoes that cannot carry certain diseases. This could enable us to remove malaria, which kills millions of people worldwide. The more people that are alive, the larger the economies are, the more development can occur, the more likely countries are to get out of poverty. It could raise living standards globally in the long run. And fighting disease is something that humanity has struggled for ages, and this is the first step where we can do it in a totally different way. So that is going to be written down, what we do with this, how we do it, and it will be remembered, especially for all of those millions of people that are threatened by the diseases that we can eradicate. Artificial intelligence, that's also one of those forking paths. It could go either way. It could free humanity up for more mental labor or creative labor, or it could just make our regular labor more efficient. We don't know. But the concept of artificial intelligence, that was just a fantasy 50 years ago. It was something for the distant future 10 years ago. Well, it's here now. We don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, or 5 years, or 50 years. So the development of how that goes is going to be remembered, especially since literally every working person is going to be affected by artificial intelligence one way or another. Social media. Now we're going to ask a question here. How many people believe that social media, in the long run, is good for humanity? Raise a hand. Okay, fair enough. How many people believe that social media is going to be bad for humanity in the long run? Okay, slightly more positives, but still a few think that it's bad. Now, again, we don't know how this is going to go. It's a matter of personal perspective, what you believe and why you believe so. I believe that, well, social media allows for one person to communicate with hundreds, thousands, millions of people at once. It allows for a community, allows for a belonging. I think that could really improve mental health and communication globally. But there's also a downside. People that are feeling a bit down or a bit on a negative mood, that can escalate by social media. People can be really rude, as we all likely have encountered. And it's easy to dig a trench in a bad mood on social media. So no one can say how it will go. One of those forking paths. But which way it goes will be remembered, because sooner or later social media is going to evolve in one direction or the other, and it's going to change for the better or for the worse, and which way it goes is going to be noted down, since it will be relevant for those people 100 years from now. And as a final word, I just want to say that the best way to predict the future is to create it yourselves. We have talked about a lot of bad events, we have talked about a lot of good trends, there's also good events, of course, but that doesn't happen on your own. It's us, the people, civil populace. We make the difference, and we make the most out of these trends. Work with organizations, contribute to your part, work to make society a better place for not just your sake, but for everyone's. The direction the world goes doesn't happen on its own. It's up to us, humanity,